Okay, completing the square is an important way of solving a quadratic equation, and it basically puts the equation into the form we can use the square root property. And the square root property basically says that what we have to do is get if I have x squared is equal to k, then this implies that x is either equal to the square root of k or the negative square root of k. Okay? Now, the idea of completing the square comes from this. Let's suppose I have x plus 1 and it's a square. We already know that this is the same as multiplying x by 1 by itself, x plus 1 by itself. And by FOIL, this becomes x squared, outside ones be an x, inside one x, and the last ones will be 1. And this comes out to be x squared plus 2x plus 1. Now I want you to notice what happens if I do this for x plus 2 squared. Then again, this is x plus 2 by x plus 2, alright, which is going to be x squared plus 2x plus 2x plus 4, which comes out to be x squared plus 4x plus 4. Let's do it one more time, and let's suppose we have this, which is x plus 3 by x plus 3, and of course this will become x squared plus 3x plus 3x plus 9, which of course is equal to x squared plus 6x plus 9. Now what I want you to notice is this. I have a 2 here and I have a 1 here. Notice if I halve the 2 I'll get 1, and if I square it I get 1. Notice what happens here. If I halve the 4 I'll get 2, square it and I'll get 4. If I halve the 6 I get 3, and when I square it I get 9. So completing the square is doing the reverse process. Now if I have a negative sign here, then all that changes is the sign in front of the x term. So the idea of completing the square is this. Okay, let's suppose we have a quadratic equation. So let's do an example. Alright, complete the square. Alright, and solve the equation. Alright, so let's suppose I want to solve this equation. X squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, the way we do this is we start working on just these two terms. Okay, so the first thing, so let's do step 1, is isolate this part by adding negative 3 to both sides. Okay, so notice I've got a subtract negative 3 and I subtract the negative 3 here. Right, then I do what I did up here. Remember what I noticed is that we had half of this, and then when I squared it and added it I got this. Okay, so half of negative, so let's do it here. So let's do a half of the negative 4 gives me negative 2, and now I'm going to square it. And so this will become equal to 4. So I'm going to add 4, and I can't just add 4 to one side, I've got to add 4 to both sides to keep the equation balanced. It's like a seesaw, okay? Now this part here is our squared part, which is the one going backwards here. All right, the only difference here is this is an addition, and this is this one down here is a subtraction. So what I'll have is x take 2 squared, it's now a squared number on this side, is equal to 1. Right, now notice here that it's all of this. If I was to FOIL out x take 2, just like I did up here, I'd end up with this thing with the negative sign here. Right, I can now apply the square root property. So this will imply that x take 2 is equal to 1, or x take 2 is equal to negative 1. Now I solve this linear equation by adding 2 to both sides, so I get a 3, or I get x is equal to 1. And so my solution set is going to be 1, 3. Okay. All right. So let's call this one here step 2. Okay. Is actually figuring out what this number is that we need to add to each side. All right. Let's do another example. Example 2. All right. Solve by completing the square. Okay, so here's our problem. Right, now, notice up here, very important. What's the number in front of each of the x squareds? There's only a 1 there, isn't there? Because it's just 1x squared. We don't put the 1 there because that's what it means. All right. Now notice here that we have a 4. So now our step 1 is make the coefficient of x squared a 1. Now to do that we need to divide, all right, the equation by 4. That means every term. All right, so this means the equation now becomes x squared, because when I divide this one by 4 I'll just be left with x squared, minus 3 on 4x, okay, dividing this one by 4, minus 10 on 4 equals 0. So this implies then that x squared minus 3/4 x. Right, now if I divide through by 2's here, I'll end up with a 5/2. All right, and I'm going to put that on the other side. And so I'm adding 5 on 2 to both sides. All right, so step 2 now, okay, is we need to work out what this term is. So we need a half of the term that's there, which is -3/4. All right, and then we've got to square it. So this is going to be a half of this will be -3/8. Square it gives me 9 on 64. So this is going to mean that we're going to have to solve x squared minus 3/4 x. I'm going to have to add the 9 on 64 this side, and I'm going to have to add the 9 on 64 this side. So the awkward thing here is we've got fractions. Now this part here is always the squared part, and it is always what this number in here is. So here's our squared part. Now we need, of course, over here, if I need this all on 64, what I'm going to have? Well, I'm going to have, need to multiply this one here by what? 32, is that right? 32, so we need 32 times 5, which is going to be 10, 160, so it's 169 on 64. Okay? Alright, so this is 160 on 64 plus 9 on 64 is 169 on 64. Alright, now step 3. Alright, we want to apply the square root property. Okay, so this means, all right, that we're going to have x take 3/8 is going to be equal to the square root of 169 on 64, or x take 3 on 8 is going to be negative square root of 169 on 64. So this means that x is going to be, add 3/8 both sides, plus, now this square root of 169 will be 13 over 8, so this is going to be 16 on 8, which of course is 2, okay, And over here we're going to have x is going to be equal to 3/8 minus 13 on 64, which is going to be negative 10. Oops, that's on 8, sorry. Alright, it's going to be negative 10 over 8, which is going to be negative 5 on 4. So at the end of the day, our solution is going to be negative 5 on 4 and 2. Okay, and that's how we do completing the square.